Welcome to the Debt Matters Podcast, where we help Canadians find solutions to their debt with licensed insolvency trustees from across Canada. I'm Wayne Kay. Coming up in today's show, can you cancel a consumer proposal? So we're going to discuss what is a consumer proposal and who can use one, how it actually works, what are the voting times and the thresholds to actually pass a proposal, what does that look like? What if the creditors disagree with what you're actually proposing? And what's the difference between a withdrawal and an annulment when it comes to a consumer proposal? My guest today is Matt Bader from Allen Marshall & Associates, licensed insolvency trustee with offices in Alberta, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and BC. Matt, thanks for being here. Being on the show.
My pleasure, Wayne. Happy to be here.
Well, we're going to be talking about the consumer proposals and canceling a consumer proposal. Why would anybody cancel a consumer proposal?
That's a fairly good question, Wayne. In some respects, I guess running the assumption that people understand what a proposal is, but just so that you know, a proposal is a settlement offer made to your unsecured creditors. Administered by a licensed insolvency trustee, such as somebody like myself, or a qualified designate from the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. But it's a formalized restructuring of debt, ultimately, is how it works. So the reason why somebody would pull one back or would withdraw one, I mean, it could be based on nature of debt. I've certainly run into it before where we found out, oh no, there was a joint debtor on there. And as a result of that, it's going to be survivable against somebody's mother or something like that who co-signed on the debt with them. So I've had proposals sort of withdrawn or canceled because of that.
Oh, okay.
I've also used them. Most recently, we did a proposal to the guy owed CRA a bunch of money, so we got the stay of proceedings into effect to protect him, but he hadn't filed his income taxes in a few years. So we get the proposal in place, but then we use the time frame of the voting period of the proposal to get his taxes filed. In the filing of the income taxes, I think the amount that CRA had filed for GST went from like $12,000 down to like $900 because there were credits and things like that he was able to offset. For somebody like that, withdrawing a proposal, makes sense.
And I just kind of wanted to start with, because that's the title of the show is, can you cancel a consumer proposal? I wanted to know why. So let's dive more deep into this because it actually sounds like it's quite a complex way of doing things. First off, you kind of mentioned consumer proposal. So you can't pay any of the debts. Things are looking bad. It's different than a bankruptcy. So a consumer proposal, what's the simplest way of explaining it?
So like I said, it is a formalized debt settlement. It's typically done in light of what happens when somebody would file an assignment in bankruptcy. So what myself and my wonderful proposal team would do is we would pretty much generate or craft an offer based on the debtor's situation. So if you have, and I mean, it's very straightforward. If you do the math and you say, okay, if this person is going to file an assignment in bankruptcy and they're going to pay $15,000 into the bankruptcy based on fees or assets or whatever, then you go forward to the creditors and you say, well, rather than that, how about we do this proposal where I'll pay $24,000 instead of the 15. So it then becomes a settlement offer. Oh, rather than paying $500 a month for 21 months under the bankruptcy, it would be more than that because that would typically only be about $10,000. But I'll pay like $200 a month under a proposal. So it becomes a formalized debt restructuring. A good alternative to a bankruptcy because it does anchor the payments once the creditors have accepted it. It's on the credit for 3 years after they're done. Proposal has to be done within 5 years. So we typically make our offers over 5 years. But it becomes a very stable way with a good degree of predictability as far as what the monthly obligation is going to be for a prolonged period of time. And it's a good way to really just to clean up the debt. They're actually probably about 85 to 90% of my filings currently are proposals, because it is very much an easier way to sort of settle things up.
Why would a creditor say yes? I mean, they're owed $10,000, and then you write up a proposal saying, okay, we're going to give you $4,000. Why do they say yes?
But typically because the bankruptcy would give them less. So when you look and you say one of the easier numbers to work with is $15,000, and I'm going to talk in really general amounts, because it's not quite as balanced as I make it sound as an example. But when somebody, say you owe $30,000 in unsecured debt, and we do the math on your bankruptcy, and let's say between your income and the assets that you have, you're going to have to pay $15,000 into a bankruptcy. Okay. Yep. So I say, okay, Wayne, for you to file for bankruptcy is going to cost $15,000 because you have $10,000 in equity in your house and you have surplus income of $5,000. So $15,000, boom. Now, Wayne, I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. This guy here, he got to eat. So I certainly have fees that have to get paid, but you as a debtor in a bankruptcy, you don't pay me. My fees would come out of that $15,000 that I would say this is a bankruptcy amount. And, ballpark, it's all tariff based. So anybody, creditors know, trustees know, debtors know, everyone who knows is going to say, well, because it's set up in how a trustee gets paid, the trustee's fees are calculated. But by the time fees are paid, taxes are paid, and everything like that, in a bankruptcy, you might say, well, there's only $5,000 left to be dispersed for the creditors by the time you've been through everything that's associated in running a bankruptcy file. So because of that, you could say, okay, well, creditors, you're owed $30,000, but in this bankruptcy, there's only going to be about $5,000 to be dispersed. So when you look at a proposal and you say, okay, well, how about I do the same thing? And in a proposal, and typically you want to do a proposal for more than, you say, well, why would I offer $15,000 in a proposal when the bankruptcy is going to pay them $15,000? So in this scenario, I could say, well, I'd probably be able to do the work for half the price under a proposal. So by the time fees are paid, taxes paid, everything like that's associated, you may only have $5,000 in fees. So there would be $10,000 in the pot available to the creditors. So the creditors are always looking at bottom line to say, after all the expenses are paid, what is available to us in a bankruptcy versus a proposal? So that tends to be what would get them to sway or vote in favor of it. I mean, people are always voting with their wallets.
Right.
So, and banks are no different. I mean, I'm going to let you in on another secret there, Wayne. Banks, they're out there to try and make some money, right? So we would like to think that as we put good proposals in front of the creditors that might say, okay, well, here's a 10 or 15 cent return in a bankruptcy. So here's a 25 or 30 cent on the dollar return in a proposal, that the creditors would gravitate towards that offer. That is getting them more money.
Do they ever come back to you and say, well, we're hoping we get a little extra?
All the time.
Oh, okay. So it's a negotiation. All right. Okay,
it can very much so. So the voting's actually very simple. So what happens with when somebody files a consumer proposal is they sign the papers, we send the documents out, and the creditors have this window of time, 45 days, where we send notices out to them. And, I'd say, I got Wayne here and he filed a proposal, and effective whatever day, how much money did he owe you? It's called a proof of claim form that we would send out to the creditors, and the creditors would fill it out and they'd come back and I say Wayne owed $10,000. They come back and said, well, you really owed $10,348.19. So they would come back with the exact dollar amount. But what happens in a proposal is they come back with that dollar amount, but typically they will file what's called a voting letter with that proposal. And they'll say, are they for the proposal, or are they against the proposal, or are they against the proposal and want to have a meeting of the creditors? So what happens is at the end of 45 days, because all the timelines are prescribed, it's all based on legislation that tells us, and everything is neatly prescribed. Everyone knows the rules. Like it's the levelest playing field you're going to get between the debtor and the creditor because there's a very, very defined rule book.
Okay.
There
Perfect.
are defined timelines. Everything is laid out to say this is the process with no surprises, no delays, no nothing. So what happens 45 days after you filed that proposal, we take a look and we say, okay, do we have to have a meeting of the creditors? So we go through all this paperwork that's come back. And the rules say that if creditors representing an aggregate of 25% or more of the total liabilities request it, then we have to have a meeting of creditors. Because where we actually count the votes is at the meeting of creditors. So if I get to day 45 and I don't have to have a meeting of creditors under a consumer proposal, that is called deemed approval. We have deemed creditor approval. Nobody said no and requested that we count the votes. So therefore, the proposal is deemed to be approved. 15 days later, you have court approval, which is a deemed court approval. Very rarely that we'd actually go to court for those. So by day 61, we have a passed proposal. And that's getting it passed. Now, to your question, do creditors ever say no? Yeah, absolutely. And when they say no, they fill in their little sheet. They say no. And if they request a meeting, then we have a meeting. And then at the meeting, we count the votes. Now, to pass a proposal, what you need it's simple majority. You think of every dollar you owe as being a vote. So you need 50% plus, we say $1, but really it's 1 penny, right? Whatever it is that says we get just over that 50%. And if you can get just over that 50%, then your proposal it passes, and it then becomes binding on all your creditors. So even though the other 49% said, no, we think this proposal sucks and we don't want to have anything to do with it, majority rules. If we can get that majority, then the proposal passes. So you'll have times, where I might say, oh, well, I've got 40% in favor, I've got 60% against, so now I have to go into negotiations. Oh, these guys said they don't want $250 a month, but they'll take $350. So I would go back to the debtor and say, are you cool with that? Because if you are, we can amend the proposal and we got to go. And if not, there is room for some negotiation there.
And so, okay, continue on.
No. And then that's about it. We just have a meeting and then it passes on the same timeline.
Right. So, and all of a sudden you're going through all this process, and at some point, all of a sudden, miraculously, there's going to be money. I guess that would be the reason why somebody would then cancel it. Or you said you find out that it's another person is co-signed on this, or it may affect them in some way, so you'll stop it. But do you have until the 61st day, or how long do you have to say, okay, hold on, we're going to put on the brakes, we're going to come up with another plan?
So there's, as far as a withdrawal of a consumer proposal, you have up until the date of court approval. So yeah, you're right. Like at any point from that day one to that court approval day, be it with a deemed creditor approval at day 45 and then deemed court approval at day 60, you have any point right up until that deemed court approval day to withdraw the proposal. And as you sort of alluded to, there's a number of reasons why. Yeah, I won the lottery, or Drunkle Ted kicked off, or the tax debt wasn't as bad as I thought, or I worked out other arrangements. There's all kinds of crazy things that can happen in people's lives that sometimes change, from one day to the next, to say my life has completely been flipped upside down. Sometimes that happens in a positive way, and they can withdraw the proposal. Now, the other thing that you have to understand about a proposal is that, you're making an offer. So Wayne, you do a proposal, and let's say just for funsies, you're offering to pay your creditors $250 a month. You say, I'll pay $250 a month for 5 years. That's 60 months. That would be $15,000. So that's your offer. I'm going to pay $15,000 to settle up on my debt.
Okay.
Now, the rules of the proposal say your proposal can never get to a point where you fall a total of 3 months payments, the equivalent of 3 months payments behind. So on a $250 a month proposal, you could never get to a point where you fall $350 behind on your proposal. That's when a default in the performance of the proposal would happen, and at which point the proposal would be deemed annulled. which would mean you're now no longer under that, right? So, I mean, it's not just a matter of saying, hey, I'll file this proposal and I promise to pay. Well, yeah, you got to pay it, right? And if you don't, then these are the consequences. Now, it needs to be sort of made clear, right? To say, on this $250 a month sort of scenario, say you were 2 months behind on your proposal, so $500, and then I don't know, you file your income taxes or something like that, and you came in, you're like, well, Matt, here's $1,250. You gave me $1,250, right? I'm going to take it from you. Well, thanks, Wayne. I'd take $500 from that $1,250, and I'd put that on those 2 months you're behind. So you're not behind anymore, right? Those two payments have been made.
Right.
But now I have a remaining $750 left over, which I then apply towards the next 3 months. So in that example, you've gone from being 2 payments behind to now being 3 ahead.
Yes.
And since a default occurs when you fall a total of 3 months payments behind where you should be, since you would actually be 3 months ahead of where you should be, it would kind of take like 6 missed payments, if you know what I mean, because you'd have to miss the 3 you're ahead to get to current and then fall 3 behind after that. So there's wiggle room there as far as the payments are concerned, but the rules are very clear to say if you're in a proposal and you want to get out of it, there's really 3 ways to do it. Withdraw prior to the court approval day, annul it through failure to make your payments, or of course, if you file an assignment in bankruptcy at any point during the proposal, that will kill the proposal and you will now be bankrupt. So that's the other alternative. And you know, we have people that do that too. Sometimes, okay, you know, things change where they say, I lost my job. And now this proposal that once upon a time the offer was viable has ceased to be viable. What do I do? And, you know, we have options to deal with that too. Can we amend the proposal? Do we send a letter out to the creditors explaining the changes and try and mess around with the payments a little bit? Because at that point, the scenario's changed, right? Mm-hmm. We're always making that offer based on what would happen if you filed for bankruptcy. And whether you or your listeners know this or not, the length of time and the fee of a bankruptcy is also determined based on your income. So when I have somebody with big income and they say, I want to file for bankruptcy, well, the bankruptcy is going to cost them a bunch of money. But if all of a sudden they've lost their job and they say, well, I don't have that same income, I said, well, that's changed that bankruptcy scenario. So that would then possibly change what I would have offered in the proposal. So, I mean, there are reasons why you could say you would annul your proposal or you would withdraw it. There's not a definite list that we can sort of go through. Right. Say these are concrete ones. It's not as common to withdraw as it would be to have people annul. And like I said, annulment will typically just happen through failure to make the payments. They file that 3 months behind, and and then their proposal gets annulled. And again, if that happens, we do have ways to fix it. There's automatic revivals. There's court revivals.
But it must be more difficult for you, though. You're in a worse situation, I would assume. Yes and no. So I'm going to, I've had the opportunity to work for several different places. I have never seen a group of people who can handle, and this is not encouraging to anybody out there. If you're my debtor and you're hearing my voice, don't annul your proposal. But, I have so much confidence in seeing what my staff, my proposal manager, and the people that she has working under her to do what you and I look at and we say is complicated. Yeah.
And they do it so easily. Which is great. That's what you want. That's what I want in back end staff, is to say that I rely on them with everything. And they have yet to disappoint me. So I mean, that's a little plug for wonderful employees
for your team at weekendhelp.ca and the
that's
whole
right.
gang there.
The best team you're going to find out there. Absolutely.
Well, I was thinking as you were explaining this, I was thinking, well, for anybody who's in bad financial situation, all of this that you were talking about just feels like these moving dartboards that there's no way I'm going to understand it, or somebody who's in debt is going to understand it. That's why we come to you, because you have members of your team who they love moving dartboards. This is what they live for. They keep everything organized. They know exactly. There's nothing coming up that's really going to surprise them. So I think that was a great way to wrap up this conversation. Any final words that you want to share regarding the consumer proposal and the canceling of the consumer proposal?
Well, yeah, I mean, we always want to make sure that when people are getting involved into this, that they've done the research, they've been properly informed, right? Like, we should never get into this with the intention of saying it's going to be tanked at some point in the future. No. There's like one rare exception where I can say you would go in and you would file sort of a holding proposal just to buy you time. And it's not something I'm going to talk about on the air because it's not something I tend to tell people they can do until it actually becomes something that they need to do. Yeah, it's all about making sure that you're properly informed. And, that's why I always recommend that people do speak to somebody like myself who's licensed. There's lots of people out there that have lots of opinions on debt. And I hear it constantly. Well, my next door neighbor told me this, and my brother did this, and this is what happened. And, I'm always going to say, go to the expert, right? Like, it's tax time when we're recording this. I don't do my own taxes because my accountant went to school to learn how to do that. I mean, Wayne, I don't even like getting a shave because there's people out there that go to school that learn how to shave people. And I'm like, I've just been doing this trial and error for like 35 years. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just faking it, right?
Right.
And it's the same thing with, my next door neighbor, the plumber, told me that I should file a proposal rather than a bankruptcy. I'm like, well, just because I eat a lot of bran doesn't make me qualified to give you plumbing advice, right? So stick to the experts.
I love it. Absolutely. That is great advice. Matt, we always have some good laughs. Thank you very much for being on the show as always.
Well, I do my best, Wayne. Thanks for having me.
Well, my guest today, Matt Fader. You can learn more or schedule that free consultation with Alan Marshall and Associates, licensed insolvency trustees at wecanhelp.ca. That's the website, www.wecanhelp.ca. And that is it for today's Debt Matters podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcast from. And of course, for more information, you can always check out debtmatters.ca. Thanks for listening.